Welcome into another edition, the Lab Epstein Hitting Podcast, episode 117. Thank you for joining us, as always, on the audio side, Apple, Google, Spotify, making us a part of your day on whichever platform. And of course, on YouTube, the Lab Epstein Hitting Podcast page. Watching the show, if you haven't done so already, please do subscribe. Jake Epstein is not here this week. He is down at the Lab BCS taking care of some things. Plus, he had some Brewers things to do as well. So I went into my phone book, if you will, my contact list, and I secured a special guest for this week, episode 117. He's got 50 plus years of baseball coaching experience, a current day professional coach for the Colorado Rockies. Please welcome my guest this week, Jerry Weinstein. Jerry, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Jim.
There's a lot of things I want to pick your brain about on this episode. But first, I want to learn more about your background. Take the audience through your career. Began in 1966 as a coach at UCLA. You've held many different positions in professional baseball. You've been a manager. You're now a current day professional coach in the Rockies organization. A little bit more about you and your background and how you've gotten to this point current day.
Well, I started out as a bad player. that's how it started.
Now, don't most coaches start out as a bad player? I mean, isn't that kind of the deal?
Interestingly enough, when I was growing up in West LA, Jake's dad and I played together a lot, and then he was at Cal and I was at UCLA, and his dad was an unbelievable athlete. He was a tremendous football player and obviously, a great hitter, and he in our area he was the man. Mm-hmm. But just a basic high school, junior college. I've done a lot of international stuff. I've coached 3 Olympics, managed Israel in the WBC, was at Sacramento City College for many years. During the summers, I'd go out and work professional baseball. And I guess 1980, a guy named Ray Poitevent was the director of player development and scouting director for the Brewers. And they needed a catching coordinator. They had drafted a high-profile catcher, and so I got to start there. And with the Brewers, I'd worked for the Orioles with Ray before that in scouting, and I had numerous steps at numerous different areas, and here I am today. I don't know how I got here. It seemed like it happened really fast.
Isn't it funny, too, you mentioned about playing with Mike Epstein. Jake always mentions this, too. It's funny. He's big hands, right? Very, very big hands. And scouts always remark on their scouting reports, from what I've heard and read and learned, that the hands, they like the hand size. And it's just amazing how things intertwine. You played with Mike. And, of course, Jake is currently with the Brewers as well. You were part of the Brewers organization. It's amazing how small the baseball community really is.
Yeah, well, Mike had big everything. He was huge, and I want to say he was like 235 in high school. He was maybe a fullback. I think maybe he went to Fairfax High School. I'm not sure, but I mean, he was a monster. He was a man-child, and just dominated both football and baseball.
With all of your experience that you just explained, and the things that you post on your social media, on Twitter, Instagram, at @JWanCatching, I think it's great. Personally, for me, and we try to do this every week, we try to teach everybody a little something new about hitting. And I've always staked to the claim that I think hitting is the hardest thing to do in all of sports, one of the most complicated things to do in all of sports. So we always try to educate our audience, and that's what we're going to do today, picking your brain. And when you post things on social media, I always have to sit down, by the way, when you do that and read it a couple of times. It's like when I was back in high school, reading my science and math books, except that I actually want to learn this time. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, I want to hear through the lens of Jerry, how you watch a professional baseball game, how you're able to compute all that information and then spit it out so eloquently on social media. How do you watch a game and are able to compute that information?
Well, I think, having done this for many, many years, you learn that there's a lot of stuff that happens outside of ball flight. And so I think I look at the game in a macro and a micro. In the macro sense, I look at everything that's happening on the field, especially the time in between pitches, what's happening in between pitches, because a lot of information, as a hitter, a lot of things happen to the hitter before the ball's released. There's a lot of things that the pitcher does or the infield does in terms of positioning or shift, or there's tempo between pitches, how a guy shakes a pitch off, things like that for hitters that give them an indicator of location and or pitch. And from a defensive standpoint, the same things in terms of little tells and little things that happen. I mean, like you don't see squeeze plays anymore, but things used to get really quiet when a manager put a squeeze play on. The dugout would get eerily quiet, and so it's just stuff like that. But I just think the old devil is in the details. Everything's important. There are no little things, and so just that's how you look at the game, as to a series of details that add up to an event, and then playing those things back in your mind's eye, and also the preparation aspect. I mean, you don't go into a game and this is the first time you've played this game. You played this game in your head, especially as a manager, numerous times before the game's even started. There was no the other night when they brought Robbie Ray in to face the Houston lefty.
Alvarez.
They didn't just pull that out of their rear end. That was a discussion piece. They looked at the data, they looked at their options, and that was pre-planned. And that's kind of how I look at a game. Nothing, you don't all of a sudden. It's not a lot of, even though there is some gut feel involved in managing and playing. It's more pre-planned than what people would think. And obviously, you play the game with your eye and you play the game with your iPad in today's game. And so the iPad comes before the game and the eye is during the game. Certain things happen during the game that are going to determine your decision-making, whether you're a player or a manager or coach.
Well, we're going to talk about analytics and data as we move along in today's show, but your background has a lot to do with catching, and a lot of things that you post have to do with a lot of what the successful catchers in Major League Baseball do. So I want to know, from your perspective, the anatomy of a real successful catcher. What makes a Major League catcher as successful as they are? Take a JT Realmuto, for example.
Well, he's a perfect example. He would be prototypical of the type of guy you want. Number one, the guy's an athlete.
Yeah.
I think probably started out as a middle infielder. Not that you have to do that, but athleticism is really important behind the plate, because the demands of the game, you're touching the ball more than anybody on your whole team throughout the season. And the impact that you can have just take the receiving piece. For example, the top guys above the average guys will save in the mid 20 in terms of runs. Let's say it's 25, 26 runs, just by virtue of how they take those shadow or straw balls, those marginal pitches, and turn them into strikes or lose them as balls, based on count, because they all have a different run value. And the 26 runs translates probably into 3 big league wins. A big league win is worth about $9 million. And so now just by virtue of your receiving, you've produced $27 million of value to your team, but it's very subtle. And maybe some people today in today's game, they would say the receiving piece is not so subtle. There's a lot of movement going on, but the fact of the matter is that we measure it, now we chart it, now we can define it, and we know the value, and we're not guessing at it. And so I think that from the catching standpoint, that's the one thing probably in the last 10 years that has changed the position and given it more value, because over the course of a season, you're seeing, as a catcher, you're seeing 10 to 15,000 pitches, and probably 4,000 of those are strikes taken. And certainly some of them are obvious strikes, and you want to get all strikes called strikes, but they're between 18 and 36 of them are marginal pitches. Baseball Savant calls them shadow pitches. I've called them straw balls for I don't know how long, but those pitches can go either way, and the better guys get a higher percentage of those pitches called strikes, which will impact the ball game in the micro, and certainly in the macro, based on the run saved data that we have.
Take me through the run. You mentioned run value. Take me through the run value and how it relates to differing from each moment in the game and each facet of a player's at bat?
Okay, I'll give you an example. Let's say it's a 3-2 count,
Hmm.
and the pitch is balls with off the plate, and the umpire is going to call it a ball or a strike, and he gets credit if it's that close to the plate. He'll get credit for getting it right, whether he calls it a ball or a strike. But if you turn it into a strike and get the guy out versus it being called a ball and the guy occupying first base, the run value is 0.59 runs.
Mhm.
So every count in every situation has a little different run value. But how many 3-2 counts are there? Close pitches that could go either way. And over the course of a season, those little bits of run values add up to wins for your team and your organization. So it's a finite skill, and but it also over the macro really pays dividends. And in the course of a game, I mean, the difference between the biggest swing count is the 2-1 count. Everybody likes to talk about the 1-1 count going from 1-1 to 1-2, which has value, but over the data shows us that between 2-1 or 3-1 or 2-1 and 2-2, the OPS value is over 800 points of OPS, which is really significant. So in a game, you've got traffic on the bases, and all of a sudden that 2-1 pitch goes to 3-1, and the hitter's in a tremendous leverage count, and now he gets a cookie to hit and drives in 2 runs, or it's 2-2 and he's in a more defensive mode, and we get him out, and those runs aren't scored. So in that moment in time, that one pitch has tremendous significance in the course of a game. I've always felt like in the course of a game that if you can reverse 3 or 4 pitches, it's the difference between winning and losing, no matter how close or how much of a blowout the game is, that there are 3 or 4 swing pitches that the outcome, if the outcome is reversed, it will affect the outcome of the game.
How do you think when Major League Baseball eventually goes to the robotic strike zone, how do you think that'll change run value? How do you think that'll change framing? And how do you think that'll change how a catcher calls the game?
Bad subject with me. I'm hoping that doesn't happen, because
Hmm.
that piece of the skill set of a catcher is to me a wonderful thing,
Sure.
and we're taking more skill out of the game. I'm hoping that before they go to ABS, they'll go to a challenge system, which they're experimenting now with in the fall league, and they've experimented with it in minor league. But I think what you say is probably inevitable. They've spent a lot of time and money, and they've done a lot of research on the ABS system. It still has some issues, and I think that'll greatly affect the role profile of a guy behind the plate, because now receiving is really important now.
Yeah.
With the ABS, receiving will not be as important. It'll be more of a bat and more of an offensive position. It'll be bat and block and maybe some throw. I think throwing is going to become, with the new rules in terms of the pitch clock and especially the 2-pick maximum rule. And I'm not sure the size of the bases are that big a factor, but the running game is going to be more of a factor moving forward. And so throwing is going to become more important behind the plate, but it will diminish the importance of receiving, even though you're not going to be able to be sloppy back there. You're not going to be able to throw a DH back there and hope that he can pick the ball up after it stops rolling, because ball's in the dirt and things like that. And the pitchers, the impact it has on the pitcher. If you catch the ball poorly, it has a negative impact on the pitchers, I think. And so I think it will be diminished in the receiving piece greatly, but you'll still have to have the right guy back there, and not just an offensive player.
Well, right, and also too with game calling. I mean, the way that Yadier Molina works with his pitchers, JT Realmuto works with his pitchers. There's an abundance of list of guys working really well with those pitchers, calling a good game. What do you think the anatomy is of calling a really good game? How do young catchers learn how to work with a pitcher in that instance?
Well, it's definitely an acquired skill. It's learned, and it's about the pitcher, and it's about pitch calling to the pitch strengths of the pitcher on that pitch.
Mhm.
And it's not about having this elaborate game plan that's going to take you from inning 1 through 9, because you don't know what the pitcher's going to have on the next pitch until he throws the previous pitch. I mean, basically, it's calling pitches is based on three things: how the pitcher threw the pitch he just threw, how the hitter reacted to it, and where the hitter's attention zone is going on the next pitch. So before I call the next pitch, I'm gonna consider all those things, and then I think for me, the pitcher has to be more a part of the process, because he has to own that pitch, and he has to take responsibility for that pitch, and can't deflect the responsibility. You know, when we put a pitch down as a catcher, we're just basically, it's a suggestion, but uh, pitchers do their homework as well, and they know. You know, we're not an MRI or an X-ray machine. We can't get inside their head or body and find out what they're thinking. And ultimately, there's no one right pitch. There's an option line. There's the best pitch, but the reality is that the most important piece in the puzzle is that the pitcher trusts and has confidence in the pitch he throws. It's better to throw the so-called wrong pitch with confidence than the so-called right pitch with doubt. Anytime they're not committed and have doubt, the chances of them executing the pitch is really in doubt. And the reality is, it's not so much, well, he should have thrown a curveball instead of a fastball, or he should have thrown this or that. It's more how the pitcher executes that pitch. It's the quality, and that gets down more to location than anything else. And even the best target hitters in the world, the professional big league baseball pitchers, they miss their target frequently. My good friend at Inside Edge, Kenny Candrena, has probably the biggest baseball database in the world, and most teams use their services. And he said that pitchers, big league pitchers, miss their target 76% of the time on fastballs, and his target miss is somewhere between 4 and 6 inches. And there are a lot. You watch games and you see where catchers set up, and you see where the ball ends up, and it's there's a big difference.
Prime example yesterday with Spencer Strider, right? First 3 innings, just humming the fastball in there, 96 plus. A couple of times, I think, hit 101. He had that nasty wipeout slider, and then he faces Bryson Stott, and he didn't execute his slider on that 3-2, whatever it was, 3-2 pitch, and Stott doubled down the line, and then things kind of snowballed from there.
Well, that's why it's so important to be in touch with that pitch, and you know, it's a game of adjustment. Now,
Right.
you don't want to be over adjust, but sometimes, you know, in terms of the pitch you call, the target you call, the mound visit, the cue you give that pitcher, the body language, you know, you can as a catcher, I think you can have. I personally believe, and most good catchers believe, that they can impact the quality of the pitch that's thrown.
Right. For me personally, I want to know from you. This has been a big time topic throughout baseball. I've always wondered about this. I'm kind of in the middle, one way or the other. I can go either way. What do you think of the one knee catching that's going on now throughout professional baseball and how it's being taught?
No, I think it's fine. I think what we're trying to, you know, we're
What
dealing with
about
it.
the pushback from people though who don't like
Well,
it
I
and
just
see fundamental
think
flaws?
I think that they a lot. I can't speak for other people, but I think that in general, a lot of times, they haven't had experience. They don't like the optics. They're not open minded, and
Mhm.
you know, I'm open to anything. We're dealing with individuals, and the key to being a great teacher or coach is dealing with the individual differences of the players.
Mhm.
Now, I mean, this is in the last 5 years, this is an unbelievable sea change in the way we're seeing catching in the big leagues, and baseball is not a game that changes rapidly. It takes guys a long time to be willing to make adjustments. Yet almost immediately, guys were going to a knee because it's less taxing on their body. They're more relaxed. They're certainly getting more strikes from the statistical standpoint. And I think it depends. It's very individualized. I don't think there are no always or nevers. You can't be closed-minded. You know, I've always said the smart man learns more from the dumb man than the dumb man learns from the smart man. And the players are telling us, and we're seeing the statistical value now Is it for everybody? No. Is it for every situation? No. If the priority is, I want the guy to be in the best stance for him to be able to execute his skill. If one knee helps you get more strikes and the priority is the strike over block or throw, then let's do that. And if the priority is throw and you're better in a traditional 2-foot stance to throw or block or whatever, and I think that you just have to be open-minded, and I think the players are telling us that there is value, and I think a lot of guys feel like, hey, I'm a better blocker from one knee because I'm already down. And when I'm in a particular one knee stance, the statistics, my personal statistics, support that position. Or, I'm in a one knee stance and I'm throwing. I think that the throwing piece we're seeing not a whole lot of difference, because the reality is when they're down on a knee targeting, if the guy breaks, they're not still down on a knee when they receive the ball. And then a lot of guys, they start in a traditional 2-foot stance. They get a breaking ball to their extension side, and they go to a knee to catch it. So now they're on a knee catching the ball in a throwing situation, where the guy that was on a knee in a running situation comes out of that stance to catch the ball. But again, very individualized. You have to, a lot of this is trial and error, and you just have to find out what works for each individual player. If you're a coach or individually how it works, I think that from a balance standpoint, you're in a 3-point stance. There's less body tension when you're down on a knee. Guys are more relaxed. Tension anywhere is tension everywhere, and so I think you have a better chance of beating the ball to the spot when you have less tension, whether it's a traditional stance or one knee stance. But I think I just question people that are so strident in their beliefs and have not really evaluated and looked at the data, or have been in the trenches with players and see how it affects their performance.
What kind of metrics points do you look at to measure the success of a catcher who might be catching one knee, or vice versa, maybe go back to the traditional way?
Well, strikes looking plus. SL plus is a true media stat that we look at. Strikes gained, which is a low percentage strikes that become strikes, or balls lost, which are high percentage strikes that get called balls. We look at those percentages. We look at throwing statistics out of the one knee stance. I did a little something yesterday. I got some data from Inside Edge that the throwout percentage is, and again, caught stealing to me is a bad stat, because the reality is that as a catcher, you're really not in control of that situation. If the pitcher's slow to the plate, if the base runner's really fast and has a great jump, if it's a tough pitch, and you really have no chance to throw that guy out. And so I think we need a little better evaluation tool than just caught stealing, because there's so many variables that factor in. But you just look at the comparative stats, and right now we don't have a large enough sampling to be sure, and it is very individualized, because there are all different kinds of wild pitches, whether they're 95 miles an hour or they're sweeping sliders, and so I think that we're getting to the point where we're getting more granular so we can be more accurate. But again, it's still very individualized, but the statistics are there relative to blocking percentage in particular zones and strike percentage. And I think if you look at Baseball Savant, they do a really good job on the different zones and who are the better catchers in particular zones, and then just anecdotally talking to catchers and hey, why do you feel better here? And they'll have their reasons, and the data will generally back them up. But nobody's going to put a guy in a position knowing that he's going to fail. Our job is to catch him doing things right and find the best mechanics or movement pattern that's going to allow him the best amount of success.
So speaking of analytics, and be sure to follow us. I'm at Jim Terra on Twitter and Instagram, and Jerry is at J1 Catching on both Twitter and Instagram as well. Joe Madden recently, when he was dismissed from the Angels this past year, and this is a quote from The Athletic, he talked about analytics, and this is a guy who I guess he was kind of at the forefront, one of the guys, one of the real flag bearers of blending traditional statistics, traditional evaluation with analytics. But he said this is a quote from The Athletic: "I still love the information. I utilize the information. Information is good. It's the imposition. I mean, it's to the point now where actually our general manager had an analytical guy dressing in the coach's room. I mean, that shouldn't occur. That's an imposition. People have come downstairs prior to the game and they load you with stuff that is not necessarily helpful." I know that that quote is individualized to Joe Madden in his time with the Angels, but what do you make of that quote and the way analytics has really taken a foothold in today's game?
Well, it has, and there are good aspects, and then there are troubling aspects. And
Mhm.
and certainly Joe, who is the absolute best guy and one of the leaders in the analytic movement from the dugout. Uh, we all understand the analytics we look at before the game. We have a game plan before the game, but it's kind of like a prize fight. The first time you get hit and knocked down, everything changes, and you have to use your eyes. You got to use your eyes in the dugout, and there's certain things subtle things that happen that's not public information. Hey, this guy got jammed, and now he's got a sore thumb, and this guy's throwing fastballs in, and he's got no chance. So we got to do this, or there are so many factors that happen during the game that you see with your eyes that are not measurable. That just it's like the guy who drowned in the lake that the average depth was 3 inches. You
Yeah.
could I mean what seems right from a statistic standpoint doesn't deal in the moment. I learned that big time this summer with Mike Sosha, because he's a big analytic guy, but he says that's more macro. The micro is the moment, and you got to deal with the moment, and you got to make those decisions rapidly. And if you watch the game and watch the periphery of the game, there's a lot of things that happen in the moment that are going to trump the iPad.
Right. Where do you see analytics going in the future at this point? It's had different iterations from 2002 to 2022 in the last 20 years. Where do you see it going?
Well, I'm not sure. The analytic guys have and I like the analytic guys.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Data is good. The man with the most information wins. Information is king, but you got to use it wisely. And uh, I think that if we are moving forward in the data, the data sphere, or whatever we want to call it, that we're going to see iPads in the dugout with pitch tendencies, and it's going to affect pitch calling. I think that especially a lot of the health data is going to come into play when guys are at risk during a game. Now we can tell in between games we've got a number of diagnostic tests and devices. I think that during games we'll be able to use data more in making decisions relative to a pitcher's health, regardless of pitch count, based on extension or release height, or what any metric you want to pick. I think that will in as far as health is concerned, I think we'll see more of that maybe in the future, and we could see maybe pitch calling in the dugout coming from computers based on sequencing and what the computer spits out. I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but I could see that happening because again, that gets back to there's a lot of subtle things that happen that don't show up on the computer.
Right. Like, for example, and Jake brought this up last week about a hitter kind of giving away the way they take a pitch, giving away what their thinking might be and thinking along with that pitcher.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt, and just things happen in the batter's box.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, some guy comes in there and says, "Hey, man," he says, "better be careful. I have a one-handed swing, and I don't want to hit you." And what he's doing, he's baiting you to move back farther, so that when they throw a breaking ball, it's going to be higher over the plate, or not even throw a breaking ball. Because
Mhm.
as a cat, there's so many little things that happen. In the batter's box, on the way to the batter's box, what the base runner does, in terms of, you look down there and he's pushing his helmet down, maybe he's getting ready to run, or he's looking back at the base to see how far off he is, or he's taking a more casual lead, or a less casual lead, or I mean, there's so many things that happen that you have to react to and process in a faster than the computer can.
Yeah,
Because you got the most complex computer in the world in your head.
that's true. Yeah, and you hear it so many times that if you fill a certain player with too much information, that's a recipe. It could be a recipe for
Oh well,
disaster.
forget about that. We've got to, the players, they're gonna, we'll coach hitters for food. They'll listen to that guy for sure.
Right.
Yeah, and so we have to be the guardrails, and we have to filter. And I think the good guys, they know what they need, and if you overload them, they get so internal that they get tied up in the batter's box. I think the game should be more external. I'm more concerned with ball flight after the ball leaves the bat, and ball flight when the ball leaves your hand, and then adjust from there, rather than all the multiple of nerve endings and muscle fibers that you want to focus on to make sure your mechanics are right.
Uh, you spend time in scouting, and there's always this it seems like this push and pull between the scouting department and the analytical department. It doesn't seem like they always are intertwined with one another and are on the same page. How do you see scouting evolving, and how could a scout and a department use analytics to better their evaluation and make it more succinct?
Yeah, I'm not sure that they're at odds. I think that the analytics people have really helped the scouting department. I think the fact that
Well, how have they helped?
I think that a great example is Houston was way ahead of the group in seeing the value of spin rate and high fastballs, and they drafted a whole. Now it's not a secret, because once it happens, they have success. Everybody's going to copy them or see what they're doing. But I think that I think there's the analytic group has been a good asset for scouting, as it has for player development. It's just the right dose and at the right time, and I think the biggest part of scouting is projecting makeup. And nobody knows. I mean, it's pretty easy to see tools there. I mean, we can see guys run and throw and field and hit for power, and we get all that. I think that now, from an analytic standpoint, is determining makeup and what effect their makeup is going to, how far they can go with their particular makeup. And because nobody's ready to play in the big leagues. They all need time and have to get faster and stronger and so on and so forth. But how is that guy going to do that based with bad outcomes and adversity? How are they going to handle that? How are they going to handle a bank account with $3 or $4 million? How much desire and drive? So I think the next wave is the analytics that can better quantify makeup, and there are a number of companies that do that, and they've worked primarily in professional football in terms of makeup and determining the best way to coach people, but also being able to better project future performance.
Before we get off the analytics topic, you mentioned development in there as well, player development. What, besides the research and development department, which I think is so paramount to any organization, the analytics department, how can they help in player development and get that player to reach their full potential, not just on the field, but off the field as well, that helps to their on-field performance, i.e., of course, strength training, mental training, things like that?
Well, I think that now we have better biomechanical data. There's better mocap systems to capture movement and analyze movement. And then I think that the professional baseball coach who has not used the analytics probably has an intuitive eye for that and was making decisions without having the data. Now they have the data to reinforce what they're doing, but we can also see the finite changes that we make and the effect it has on performance in terms of right now the hot button topic is developing quality better quality pitches based on spin rate and vertical and horizontal movement and induced vertical break and things like that. And now we can measure that with the TrackMan and the Hawkeye and Rapsodo and things like that. And now with better, more affordable motion capture hardware, that we can affect changes maybe better, but certainly faster. And then all the data we have, strength and conditioning has been a huge piece in the change of the game, because at every level players are stronger and faster. And a lot of times from a player development standpoint, we're asking player, well, if he could only do this, well, the reason he can't do it because he doesn't have flexibility, he doesn't have strength, mobility, those types of things. And so now player development is everybody getting together and figuring out what is the best formula, the best game plan for that player to develop to the maximum of his abilities.
This is a hitting podcast, as people know who listen and watch on a daily basis. So I'm going to ask you a little bit here about hitting. I want to know what you look at your absolutes and what you think makes a great hitter.
Well, hitting is about timing.
Yep.
And timing is usually about vision, and not just the 20/20 vision, but having a good visual strategy and having good mechanics that allow you to be on time to a particular pitch. And I think that sometimes we try and clone hitters into a particular mode, and I think probably the best way to do it is to backward engineer. And again, get back to ball flight. What kind of ball flight? Hey, this guy hit the ball hard. Mm-hmm. Exit velocity again, 107, and it was at a certain launch angle or a line drive. And okay, what did that swing look like? And there's a wide bandwidth in what produces that exit velocity or that launch angle. And Hunter Pence does it one way, and Trey Turner does it another way. And I think there's a wide standard deviation about what works, but all the good guys that hit, they're on time, and they have a good vision. They have good vision, good visual strategy. You can have the best swing in the world. If you don't see the ball well, you can kiss the baby. You can have the best swing in the world, and if you're early or you're late, the impact is going to be affected. So. Again, I think the biggest thing we're doing is we're finding training regimens, and I think the game has changed dramatically probably in the last 3 or 4 years. I remember when the Giants were playing well, and they talked about practicing dirty to play clean, and what they were talking about is making, in the day, batting practice would be some old guy like me hitting guys, throwing the ball and leaving no balls in the batting cage and just hitting guys' barrels at the same speed in the same spot, and guys were just trying to break the furniture in the third deck. Now we're hitting off the pitching machine much, much, much more with the speed of the game, the randomness of preparation. Now we're not beating guys up necessarily, and because you can't fail and go out and expect to succeed. You got to have some feel good BP in that terms. I think that these new foam balls they're using beat guys up less in batting practice, but again, I could talk mechanics till the cows come home, but the reality is that the better guys are less focused on mechanics and more focused on approach. And so I think at a certain point, now certainly if you're a young player, you got to learn how to swing before you learn how to hit. But at a certain point, you got to learn how to hit, and learning how to hit is strategizing situational things, being prepared for that pitcher in a particular situation, and the speed, being able to be good at swinging at strikes and good at taking balls. Those types of things will separate the average from the great more than anything else for me.
So what do you think? What advice would you give to a young hitter trying to create that strategy, a baseline for a successful strategy at the plate?
Well, I would say develop mechanics that can hit the fastball. That's number one. That would be, my training. I'm not going to put an 8-year-old in at 100 miles an hour, but appropriate eventually. And once he gets a swing, appropriate velocity for his age level. And for me, the number one pitch that you need to control is the fastball in, because that's the purest swing, hitting a line drive between the left fielder and the foul line that doesn't have topspin and doesn't have hook. Now, once you can do that, then it becomes a timing swing. That's your swing on the ball in the middle and the ball away. It's just you start it later, or you're hitting the ball out in front of your body, but not as far out in front of your body. And once you can take that best fastball away, then it keeps you from having to cheat and leak to get to the fastball in. And then courage is a big thing. And we don't talk about it a lot, but I thought it was interesting. I looked at the Nolan Ryan special on Netflix the other day, and they were talking about, Nolan was an intimidator, and he got your attention by throwing balls close to you. And he's like Don Drysdale said, the best way to get their attention is when they're flat on their back. And so fear at the plate is a factor, and a lot of times fear at the plate is lack of confidence. And again, confidence is everything. I don't care what your swing looks like. If you believe you got a chance, you usually can compete. And so having self-confidence, I think that comes back to putting guys in a drill environment where they can be successful a percentage of the time, not all the time, and then catching guys, or girls for that matter, doing things right. I think we always tend to find hey, don't do this and don't do that. I'd rather catch that person doing it right and reinforce that, because that builds self-confidence. And once they have self-confidence, they got a chance to improve their performance dramatically.
In your 50 plus years of coaching, we'll wrap up with this. How have you seen players evolved, and what do you see? How do you see those players continuing to evolve as we go further into the 2020s?
Well, I would say in today's game, players have never been better physically.
Yeah. So athletic.
Stronger, faster, in all aspects of the game. It's just like every sport. Yeah. Michael Phelps swims faster than Johnny Weissmuller. The runners, the pole vaulters, you name it. And baseball is no different. Our players are unbelievable. They've got nutritionists. They understand rest and recovery. But I think from the knowing the game, the baseball IQ, I think they've spent more time on developing themselves as individuals, less time understanding the game, and less time understanding the importance of team and teammates and winning. And they're more, big me, little we, and in a lot of respects. Not all, because and that's stuff we need a culture shift in the way. I know that one of the things we really focused on in our instructional league was baseball IQ, after action reports. We talked about the game in the early days when they were traveling on trains and guys were hanging out in locker rooms and talking about the game. And now that is not happening as much. We're not teaching the game as much as maybe we should, or we did in some years back. But I think the game has never been better in terms of the quality player. Always, you hear a lot of people complain about, the player today isn't like, hey, the player today is better than the player in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s ever thought he could be. Now, there are isolated incidences where you get just superstar outliers, and nobody's going to be better than Ted Williams or Tony Gwynn and guys like that. But
you hate to say it too, but Barry Bonds. Take away the performance enhancing.
I don't hate to say that. Barry Bonds was probably
one of the best athletes in the 90s.
One of the best hitting technicians in the history of baseball.
Sure. Yeah. You made a great point, couple of great points there. And again, to follow Jerry at J1 Catching, he teaches the game on Twitter and Instagram, bits and pieces, of course, character limit. But it's a lot of fun to be able to read your stuff. And I do appreciate you doing this today. Episode 118 next week. Jake will be back. We'll be talking about starting late at the plate, how that affects you as a young hitter or even an older hitter. We see it all the time. It's mentioned it. Jerry mentioned it today. disrupting timing. It's a big key piece for pitchers. They try to do it to hitters all the time. So we'll be talking about that and starting late next week. And don't forget to subscribe to my other podcast with Cassie Riley Boscia, of course. Cross functionality, Apple, Google, Spotify. Jerry, thanks for doing this today and
You
being
bet, Jim.
our guest co-host on episode 117.
My pleasure. Thanks.
And we will talk to you all next week. Thank you. Be sure to subscribe. Talk to you next Monday.